The fluorescent hum of the overhead lights in the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite was a constant, almost comforting drone. It was a sound I'd come to associate with clarity, with the meticulous dissection of chaos. Today, the chaos had a name, Aris Thorne. My gloved fingers traced the edge of a warped, carbonized panel, a fragment salvaged from what was once Dr. Thorne's state-of-the-art bioengineering lab. The air in the suite, scrubbed clean by filters, still carried a faint, acrid ghost of the event, burnt polymers, ozone, and something else, something metallic and sharp. A grim perfume. Catastrophic failure, a senior investigator had declared earlier, his voice echoing the initial reports from the scene. Looks like a thermal runaway, possibly a pressure breach in one of his experimental containment units. Suicide or a tragic miscalculation, take your pick. He'd shrugged, already mentally closing the file. I didn't pick. I never did. The panel before me, designated Exhibit A7, was a testament to the destruction. It had been part of a workstation, an intricately designed console according to the schematics I'd reviewed. Now, it was a twisted husk, the integrated display fused into a molten ripple of glass and plastic. The primary damage was consistent with immense, localized heat and pressure, radiating outwards. Most of the lab, from the preliminary photographs, was a similar tableau of devastation, shattered glass enclosures, buckled steel, and a fine, pervasive layer of dark particulate matter coating everything. I adjusted the magnification on the stereo microscope, bringing a section of the panel's surface into sharp focus. The material was a high-density, fire-resistant composite, designed to withstand extreme temperatures. Yet, here it was, scarred and blistered. My eye followed the intricate network of cracks, like lightning frozen in time, radiating from a central point. This was the epicenter of the thermal event, no doubt. The prevailing narrative of an accidental explosion, perhaps a volatile reagent mixing with an incompatible catalyst, or a system overload from Thorne's experimental apparatus, painted a picture of widespread, indiscriminate destruction. And for the most part, the evidence supported it. The sheer force required to pulverize the robust safety glass of the containment units, to warp structural steel beams, spoke of an uncontrolled energy release of monumental proportions. But something nagged at me. A whisper in the data, a dissonance in the symphony of destruction. I shifted the panel fractionally under the lens, angling it to catch the light just so. My gaze drifted along a section of the composite, about 3 inches from the primary blast point. Here, the material was less charred, more discolored, a faint yellowish-brown stain rather than outright blackening. It was an anomaly, a subtle break in the pattern of widespread scorching. Below the discolored area, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, was a series of minute, almost perfectly circular pits. They were tiny, no larger than the head of a pin, but distinct. Not the irregular spatter marks of molten material, nor the random pitting caused by shrapnel. These were precise, as if drilled by a microscopic, high-energy beam. And within the deepest recess of one of these pits, a glint. I carefully maneuvered a pair of ultrafine tweezers, their tips barely visible under the magnification, and gently scraped at the microscopic anomaly. A tiny fleck, no bigger than a grain of sand, detached. I transferred it to a clean slide, securing it under a cover slip. I moved to the electron microscope, the low thrum of its powerful optics filling the silence. The image resolved onto the screen, a crystalline structure, reflecting light with an unnatural brilliance. It wasn't carbon, nor any common metal alloy used in Thorne's lab equipment. Its elemental composition, as the spectrometer quickly confirmed, revealed trace elements of osmium and iridium, metals rarely found in standard lab environments. And certainly not as a byproduct of a biological experiment gone wrong. My breath hitched, a slow, deliberate intake of air. Osmium and iridium. Extremely dense, high melting point metals, often used in specialized aerospace alloys or as catalysts in very specific industrial applications. They were not components of Thorne's bioengineering research, at least not according to the extensive inventory lists I'd reviewed. And they wouldn't be present in the aftermath of a simple thermal runaway. The senior investigator's words echoed, suicide or a tragic miscalculation. But these pits, this precise, almost surgical damage, and the alien metallic trace within them. They weren't random. They weren't a miscalculation. They spoke of a focused, external application of energy, a point of entry that predated the general conflagration. It was as if something had been deliberately drilled into the panel, initiating a localized event, before the larger, more destructive explosion took hold. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a suicide. This was an illusion, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to mimic a lab disaster. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide their tracks, to make a murder look like a tragic oversight. And they had almost succeeded. Almost. I leaned closer to the microscope, my gaze fixed on the shimmering fleck of osmium iridium. My work had just begun. It was as if something had been deliberately placed, a focused application of energy before the general conflagration consumed everything else. My gut clenched with a certainty that tightened the muscles in my jaw. This wasn't an accident. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low thrum, casting a harsh, unblinking glow over the stainless steel examination table. Aris Thorne lay beneath a pristine white sheet, a stark contrast to the charred remnants of his laboratory. My gaze swept over the array of instruments, the specialized cameras, the sterile tools arranged with an almost surgical precision. The pathologist, a woman with sharp, observant eyes and a perpetual air of quiet intensity, adjusted her magnifying visor. "Read," he began, his voice a low murmur, "the preliminary findings are." Problematic, he pulled back the sheet, revealing the remains of Thorne's body. The damage was extensive, as expected from the blast and subsequent fire, but the pathologist's gloved finger traced a specific line across Thorne's left forearm. Initial reports suggested a catastrophic pressure wave from an experimental reactor, followed by thermal exposure. But look here. I leaned closer, my breath catching in my throat. The skin was seared, yes, but the pattern of the burn on the forearm was distinct, almost linear, unlike the splash or spread I'd expect from an uncontrolled explosion. A contact burn? I mused aloud, my voice flat. Precisely. And notice the depth. It's localized, not diffuse. More consistent with direct contact with a superheated surface, or perhaps a directed energy burst, at a specific point, rather than widespread thermal shock. She paused, turning to a monitor displaying a high-resolution scan. Also, the internal trauma doesn't fully align. While there's significant barotrauma, the nature of the fractures in the ribs and sternum, particularly on the left side, suggests an impact force that's disproportionate to the general blast effect. My eyes narrowed. An impact that preceded or accompanied the explosion, rather than solely a result of it? That's my working hypothesis. It's almost as if he was struck, or held, against something before the main event. She moved to Thorne's hand, which was curled inward, the fingers partially fused. "And this is curious." She used a pair of fine-tipped tweezers to carefully lift a minuscule fleck from beneath a fingernail. It was barely visible, a shimmering, almost iridescent particle, no larger than a grain of fine sand. She placed it on a slide, then slid it under a high-powered microscope. On its own, it means nothing. But its composition. It's not something we've identified in the lab's material inventory. I peered into the eyepiece. The particle glowed with a faint, unusual luminescence under the focused light. It was a metallic composite, certainly, but its crystalline structure was unlike any industrial alloy I was familiar with. It possessed an almost organic shimmer, yet it was undeniably inorganic. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a complex matrix. Early spectrographic analysis shows traces of rare earth elements, but also something entirely novel. No known industrial application, certainly nothing from Thorne's documented research. And it's not from the lab's infrastructure either. We've cross-referenced all the materials present in the facility." A cold certainty settled over me, replacing the gnawing suspicion. This wasn't a tragic miscalculation. This was deliberate. Someone had been close enough to Thorne to transfer this unique particle onto him, or he had struggled against them. The localized burn, the specific internal trauma, and now this alien fleck, they painted a picture far grimmer than an accident. Thorne hadn't just died in a lab explosion, he'd been murdered, and the explosion was merely the final, devastating flourish. Leaving the suite, the image of that iridescent particle burned behind my eyelids. It was a lead, a tangible thread in a web of ash and corporate secrecy. Back in my makeshift workspace, a small, temporary office assigned to me at the division, I pulled up the initial interviews conducted by the uniformed officers. Thorne's research, Project Chimera, was mentioned repeatedly, always with an undercurrent of awe and apprehension. It was supposedly groundbreaking, potentially revolutionary, but also highly controversial. The first name that jumped out was Dr. Silas Vance, a bioengineer from a rival research institution. The initial report described him as highly competitive with Thorne. Their professional relationship as strained. A colleague quoted Vance as having said, just weeks ago, that Thorne was playing God with forces he couldn't comprehend and that his work was a dangerous path. Vance had the scientific acumen to understand Thorne's work. Certainly a motive rooted in professional jealousy or fear of being eclipsed. The competitive landscape of high-stakes bioengineering was cutthroat, and Thorne had a reputation for guarding his breakthroughs with an almost obsessive zeal. Then there was Maya, a former research assistant. Her interview was terse, almost resentful. She'd been dismissed by Thorne 6 months prior, under what she described as unjust circumstances. She claimed Thorne was paranoid, secretive. Had accused her of trying to steal his early research data. He thought everyone was out to get him, she'd told the interviewing agent, her voice laced with bitterness. He drove me out because I asked too many questions about Project Chimera. A disgruntled former employee, with intimate knowledge of the lab's layout and Thorne's routines, certainly had a plausible motive, fueled by vengeance. I leaned back in my chair, the plastic creaking under my weight. Two immediate persons of interest, both with access, motive, and a history of animosity towards Thorne. Vance, driven by professional rivalry and perhaps a genuine concern over Thorne's secretive work. Maya, fueled by a deep-seated grievance and a desire for retribution. The picture was still hazy, obscured by the smoke and fire, but the edges were starting to sharpen. The challenge now was to connect that unique particle, that specific trauma, to one of them, or to someone else entirely. The game had just begun. Under the precise beam of the electron microscope, the minuscule fragment glowed with an unnerving, almost alien luminescence. Its crystalline structure, irregular and fractured, had no natural analog I'd ever encountered. My colleague, a specialist in microtrace analysis, peered over my shoulder, his breath held. "It's synthetic." "Read," the specialist murmured, his voice tight. "No doubt. And given its composition, the energy required to create it. It's a byproduct of something incredibly volatile, highly controlled." I nodded, the image burned into my retina. This wasn't just dust from the blast site, this was a signature. A signature that had been on Thorne's person, near the localized burn, a detail that screamed intention. My mind raced, connecting the dots, the unique particle, the specific internal trauma Thorne sustained, the precise nature of the blast. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was an engineered event. My focus shifted from the microscopic to the digital. Thorne's work, the core of his existence, lived in the labyrinthine data streams of his secure servers. I'd requested immediate access, bypassing layers of corporate red tape that typically choked such investigations. The corporate liaison, a woman with a perpetually strained expression, had fought me every step of the way, citing proprietary secrets and national security implications. But the severity of Thorne's demise had been undeniable, and I had leverage. Seated at a console, my fingers flew across the keyboard. Thorne's research, as rumored, was groundbreaking. The initial files I accessed detailed advanced genetic sequencing, focusing on highly specific, targeted modifications. The implications were staggering, not just global health advancements, but also, disturbingly, the potential for precision-engineered biological agents. This was the kind of work that could reshape humanity or shatter it. I navigated through encrypted directories, the architecture complex, designed for maximum security. Thorne had been meticulous, a digital fortress guarding his intellectual property. But even the most robust defenses could be breached, or, more insidiously, compromised from within. My screens filled with lines of code, complex data sets representing biological sequences. It was dense, layered information, but patterns began to emerge. I was looking for anomalies, digital fingerprints that didn't belong. And then I found them. A series of timestamps, recently altered, caught my eye. Not just minor tweaks, but significant shifts, a digital brushstroke attempting to erase a presence. I dove deeper, running a forensic scan on the directory, reconstructing fragmented logs. There it was, evidence of an external access attempt, sophisticated and persistent, less than 48 hours before Thorne's death. Not just an attempt, but a breach. Someone had gotten in. And then, the attempted wipe. A specific project file, codenamed Project Chimera, had been targeted. Not deleted outright, which would have been too obvious, but systematically corrupted, fragmented, and overwritten with junk data in a desperate attempt to render it unrecoverable. It was a professional job, designed to look like a system error, but I knew better. The precision, the thoroughness, spoke of someone intimately familiar with Thorne's digital architecture, or someone with access to tools far beyond typical hacking software. The very effort to hide it screamed its importance. A knock on the door pulled me from the glow of the screens. It was the junior agent, ushering in Thorne's assistant, Maya. She looked smaller than I remembered from the crime scene, her frame hunched, eyes red-rimmed and distant. Her movements were hesitant, as if the air itself resisted her. "Thank you for coming in, Maya," I said, indicating a chair opposite me. "I appreciate your cooperation." She sat, her gaze fixed on her clasped hands. I don't understand any of this. Dr. Thorne. He was brilliant." "He was," I agreed, keeping my voice even. "We're trying to understand what happened. Can you tell me about Project Chimera?" Maya flinched, a visible tremor passing through her. She hugged herself, her eyes darting to the secure monitors displaying Thorne's code. It was his most important work. He spent every waking moment on it. Said it would change everything. Her voice was barely a whisper. Did he ever express concerns about the project's security? Or about anyone trying to access it? She hesitated, chewing on her lip. He got paranoid in the last few weeks. Really paranoid. He kept saying someone was watching him. He'd check the cameras, encrypt everything twice over. He thought they were after his work. Who, Maya? Who was they? Her head shook slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. He never said. Just them. He said the project was too valuable, too dangerous, to fall into the wrong hands. He even mentioned trying to make copies, backups he called them, off-site, just in case. My gaze sharpened. Off-site backups. If the original had been compromised, a hidden copy could be the key. Did he ever mention where these backups might be? She looked up then, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed to overshadow her grief. No. He just said he had to protect it. That if anything happened to him, no one should ever find it. Thorne hadn't just been paranoid, he'd been prescient. He'd anticipated this. Someone wanted Thorne's research, and they were willing to kill him to get it. But they hadn't just killed him, they tried to bury his work with him. The question was, why? And what exactly was in Project Chimera that made it worth such an elaborate, deadly charade? A quiet corner of the university campus, nursing a lukewarm coffee. Dr. Thorne was difficult, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He pushed us, pushed himself. He was obsessed with his project, wouldn't let anyone else near it. Not even me, towards the end. What was the project, Maya? I asked gently. She hesitated, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. It was groundbreaking. Something about advanced genetic markers, a way to resequence human cells for purposes I didn't fully understand. But he was so secretive. He fired me 2 months ago, said I was a distraction. I think he just wanted to work alone. Any hard feelings after being fired? She shook her head slowly. More fear than anger. He was changing, becoming paranoid. He thought people were watching him, trying to steal his work. I was upset, yes, but I respected his genius. I wouldn't hurt him. I wasn't even in the city when it happened, visiting family. Her alibi, like Vance's, seems solid. But her fear, that was genuine. It resonated with Thorne's alleged paranoia, painting a picture of a man under siege, not just a victim of bad luck. Armed with the knowledge of Thorne's paranoia, I delved into the digital remnants of his lab, a task that required navigating layers of encryption and bespoke security protocols. The IT specialist, a quiet individual with quick fingers, worked diligently beside me in the police department basement, where we'd set up a temporary digital forensics station. He really didn't want anyone getting into this, Reed, the specialist murmured, his face illuminated by the glow of the monitor. Multiple firewalls, custom-built authentication. It's like he was preparing for an invasion. After hours of painstaking the cool, sterile air of the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite hummed with the low thrum of analytical machinery. I leaned over the electron microscope, my eye pressed to the eyepiece, the unique polymer from Thorne's lab accident filling my vision. Its molecular structure, a tightly knit lattice of synthetic compounds, shimmered under the focused beam. I'd spent the better part of the last 24 hours in this room, fueled by lukewarm coffee and an obstinate refusal to accept the official narrative. The trace particle, no bigger than a grain of pollen, was my anchor in this sea of engineered deception. I'd cross-referenced its spectral signature against every known industrial polymer database, every experimental compound registry, and every obscure academic publication I could access. The initial results had been frustratingly generic, a broad class of high-strength, heat-resistant materials. But then I'd focused on the anomalies, the minute imperfections in its crystalline structure, the specific ratios of its constituent elements. These weren't standard. They spoke of custom fabrication, a bespoke compound designed for a very particular purpose. My fingers danced across the keyboard, inputting a new set of parameters, refining the search algorithm. The database word, processing the complex data. A single hit flickered on the screen. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was close enough to be significant. An experimental polymer developed by a specialized materials science firm, known for its work in advanced aerospace applications. The firm was relatively small, highly secretive, and located on the other side of the country. A direct line, tenuous but present, to the source. A knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just a random compound, it was a deliberate choice, manufactured by an entity with resources and a need for extreme durability. The implications were chilling. I saved the findings, a digital breadcrumb trail leading away from a simple accident. The suite felt colder suddenly, the hum of the machines more insistent. I gathered my notes, the weight of the new information pressing down on me. Stepping out of the building into the late afternoon sun, the city's roar felt sharper, more aggressive. My mind was still replaying the polymer's structure, the precise engineering. I walked briskly towards my vehicle, a sense of urgency propelling me. I needed to follow this lead, to understand who had access to such specialized materials. I was halfway across a busy intersection, the pedestrian signal blinking green, when the world tilted. A heavy cargo truck, its engine roaring, swerved sharply from the inner lane, tires squealing in protest. It was moving too fast, veering directly into my path. I froze for a split second, the bright flash of its grille filling my vision, the blast of its horn deafening. Instinct took over. I threw myself forward, a clumsy, desperate lunge, landing hard on the asphalt just as the truck's massive front bumper scraped past where I'd been standing. A hot gust of wind, reeking of diesel and burnt rubber, washed over me. The truck didn't stop. It sped through the intersection, disappearing into the traffic stream as quickly as it had appeared. My palms were scraped raw, my knee throbbed, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins drowned out the pain. I pushed myself up, heart hammering against my ribs, scanning the street. No other vehicles had been close enough to force the truck's swerve. It had been deliberate. A message. Thorne hadn't been paranoid. He'd been right. I drove straight back to my personal lab, a small, unassuming space I kept for sensitive analyses, separate from the more public areas of the division. The door lock clicked open, the familiar scent of solvents and old paper greeting me. I moved through the room, my eyes sweeping over every surface, every object. Nothing seemed overtly disturbed. My microscope was where I'd left it, the stack of research papers precisely aligned. But then I saw it. My favorite ceramic mug, usually kept on the left side of my desk, was sitting on the right. A minor detail easily dismissed as my own absent-mindedness. Except I was meticulous, almost pathologically so, about the placement of my tools. Someone had been here. Someone had been in my space. The hairs on my neck prickled. This wasn't a random incident. This was a direct, escalating threat. They knew I was digging. They were watching. My phone buzzed, vibrating against the polished wood of the desk. The caller ID showed Maya's contact. "I need to talk to you. Can you come over? Please? I can't. I can't be alone." "What's wrong, Maya?" I kept my tone even, but my grip tightened on the phone. "It's just, after what happened to you today, I heard about it. And then, I just remembered something. Something I should have told you." About Thorne. His voice broke, a ragged sob catching in his throat. "I'm so scared, Reed. I should have said something sooner." "What about Thorne, Maya?" I pressed, my mind racing, connecting the dots between her fear and my accidents. A long, shuddering breath. He was acting stranger than usual in the weeks before. Before everything. And I saw someone. A man. Not part of the usual staff. He was in Thorne's lab. After hours. More than once. I thought maybe Thorne had hired new help, or a consultant he didn't want anyone to know about. He was so secretive with Project Chimera, you know? But now, after what happened, and with you, I think it was him. The man. He was always alone. And he wasn't supposed to be there. The phone felt heavy in my hand. An unknown individual. Accessing the lab after hours. It wasn't a miscalculation. It wasn't suicide. It was a planned, precise operation. The unique polymer, the data manipulation, the engineered blast, the attempted wipe of Project Chimera, and now the escalating threats against me. All of it coalesced into a terrifyingly clear picture. Someone had gained access, someone with the knowledge and the means to orchestrate Thorne's demise, and they were still out there, watching, waiting. And I was getting too close. Around me, banks of monitors glowed, their screens awash with data streams, schematics, and spectral analyses. I sat hunched over my primary console, fingers dancing across the keyboard, a determined frown etched on my face. The weight of the unknown caller, the escalating threat from the previous night, still resonated, adding a sharp edge to my concentration. This wasn't just about finding a killer, it was about understanding a meticulously crafted illusion. My current deep dive was into the lab's environmental control logs. Thorne's facility was a fortress of bespoke systems, designed for precision and security. Every air exchange, every temperature fluctuation, every power surge was recorded. The initial report had dismissed a brief dip in oxygen levels and a subsequent spike in inert gas as a system anomaly, perhaps related to the catastrophic event. I knew better. Anomalies were often fingerprints. I scrolled through lines of code, timestamped entries blurring into a digital river. Then, I found it. Not a dip, but a controlled, almost imperceptible reduction in oxygen saturation, beginning almost 30 minutes before the primary incident. It wasn't a malfunction, it was a deliberate adjustment, slowly starving the atmosphere of a crucial component. This wasn't a simple toggle, it required overriding multiple failsafes, a deep understanding of the system architecture. Only someone with intimate knowledge of Thorne's custom programming could have pulled that off. Next, I cross-referenced the atmospheric logs with the power grid data. Simultaneously, a series of microfluctuations in power delivery to Thorne's primary research apparatus registered. Not enough to trigger an alarm, but precisely timed. It was like watching a conductor orchestrate a symphony of destruction. Each instrument, a lab system, played its part in a precise, escalating sequence. I pulled up the schematics of Thorne's experimental chamber, overlaying the environmental data. The chamber, designed for high-pressure synthesis, had its own localized atmospheric controls. The data showed a distinct, programmed increase in internal pressure, far exceeding the parameters Thorne typically used for the substance he was known to be working on. This wasn't a miscalculation, it was a forced overload. My eyes narrowed, tracing the flow. First, the general lab atmosphere was subtly altered. Then, the specific chamber pressure was ratcheted up, pushing the boundaries of its structural integrity. But even that wouldn't have been enough for the kind of catastrophic failure we saw. There had to be a trigger. I switched to the security camera feeds, salvaged from the fragmented hard drives. The internal cameras, though damaged, had captured the moments leading up to the blast. Blurry, pixelated, but enough for my colleague, a digital forensics specialist who'd been working alongside me, to reconstruct a sequence. He pointed to a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer near the chamber's intake manifold. "That's it," he murmured, his voice tight with concentration. "The unique polymer." It wasn't just a trace. It was a catalyst. I zoomed in, enhancing the image. The shimmer was faint, almost like a heat haze, but it was there, just as the chamber pressure peaked. The polymer, resistant to extreme temperatures and pressures, had been precisely placed. It wasn't designed to react with the chamber's contents but to contain a localized, intense reaction within itself, acting as a fuse. The polymer, I stated, more to myself than to my colleague. It wasn't meant to cause the explosion directly. It was a conduit, a controlled ignition point. It allowed the buildup of pressure and the specific atmospheric mixture to reach a critical state, then provided the final, localized spark. The pieces began to lock into place with a chilling precision. The reduced oxygen in the general lab atmosphere, the elevated inert gas. The forced overload of the chamber, pushing the volatile compound inside to its breaking point. And finally, the unique polymer, a sophisticated igniter, remotely activated. The remote trigger, I said, pointing to a subtle, brief spike in the lab's Wi-Fi network traffic, precisely coinciding with the polymer's activation. It wasn't a physical switch. It was a signal. A digital command, sent from outside the immediate vicinity, perhaps even outside the building. The implication hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't an accident. It was a masterclass in engineered sabotage. The killer hadn't just understood Thorne's work, they had understood his systems. They knew the vulnerabilities, the failsafes, and how to manipulate them without leaving a trace that an untrained eye would ever spot. Every step was designed to mimic a catastrophic research malfunction, an unfortunate miscalculation by a brilliant but reckless mind. The perpetrator had orchestrated a multi-stage manipulation of the lab's atmosphere and equipment, triggered remotely, to create a fatal event that pointed squarely at Thorne himself. The unique polymer, the data manipulation, the engineered blast, all part of a meticulously planned operation. The complexity of the attack, the need for such precise timing and intimate system knowledge, narrowed the field of suspects considerably. This wasn't a random act. This was personal, precise, and deeply rooted in the world Thorne inhabited. The person behind this wasn't just a killer, they were a ghost in the machine, and I was going to unmask them. The tension in the suite was palpable, mirrored by the grim determination settling deep within me. We were no longer looking for an accident. We were hunting a phantom. Leaving no trace of their true intent. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't an accident. It was a masterclass in engineered sabotage. They knew the vulnerabilities, the failsafes, and how to manipulate them without leaving a direct fingerprint. My mind reeled, sifting through the evidence once more, each microscopic detail now screaming a different story. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh, unforgiving glare on my workbench, illuminating a scattered array of Thorne's salvaged digital devices. The primary server had been fried, a calculated act of destruction, but the secondary backups and personal drives, though encrypted, had survived the catastrophic event mostly intact. Around me, other investigators moved with quiet efficiency, their work separate from mine, their focus on other cases. My world, however, had shrunk to the glowing screens and silent chips before me. The sheer sophistication of the kill method gnawed at me. Most killers sought to hide their crime, to make it look like anything but murder. This one had gone beyond that. They had orchestrated a grand illusion, a performance designed to convince anyone looking that it was an accident or a tragic suicide, while simultaneously destroying the core of Thorne's research. But why? If the goal was simply to steal the research, there were far simpler, less destructive methods. This suggested a motive far more complex, a desire not just to possess, but to prevent. To prevent the completion, the release, the very existence of whatever Thorne was working on. Read anything? The lead investigator, a seasoned veteran with weary eyes, paused at the entrance to my section, a steaming mug cradled in his hands. I shook my head, my gaze fixed on the complex encryption schema displayed on my monitor. Still sifting through the digital debris. The server was a total loss, but I've managed to pull a few personal logs from an older backup drive. Heavily encrypted, of course. Keep at it. We need something solid, a motive that makes sense of this mess. He nodded, then retreated, leaving me to the quiet battle with Thorne's digital defenses. I spent the next several hours in a state of hyper-focused intensity, my fingers flying across the keyboard, running decryption algorithms, cross-referencing file metadata, and painstakingly reconstructing corrupted sectors. The complexity of Thorne's digital security was impressive, a testament to his paranoia or perhaps a premonition. He hadn't just used standard encryption, he'd built layers, custom protocols nested within commercial ones, like a digital matryoshka doll. It was slow, painstaking work, each successful bypass a small victory against an invisible adversary. Then, I saw it. Tucked away in a directory labeled Project Chimera, which had initially appeared to be a decoy folder containing innocuous research papers, was a hidden partition. It wasn't just encrypted, it was cloaked, designed to appear as random noise to even advanced scanning tools. A digital ghost. Thorne had clearly gone to extraordinary lengths to hide this specific data. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me. This was it. This was the real secret. My fingers moved faster, driven by a renewed sense of urgency. The standard decryption tool stalled, unable to break through this custom shell. I had to approach it differently, reverse engineer Thorne's own encryption methods based on the fragments I'd already recovered from his less secure files. It was like trying to guess a lock combination by studying the scratches on the keyhole. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I worked, my mind a whirlwind of code and conjecture. The suite was emptying around me, the late shift taking over, but I barely registered their presence. Hours blurred into a single, continuous effort. Finally, with a soft ping that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room, the final layer gave way. The screen filled with text. It wasn't research data, not directly. His language was precise, almost clinical, yet laced with an undercurrent of profound moral distress. Entry 147. My work on cellular regeneration was intended for healing. The applications I see emerging from Omnicorp's funding are monstrous. They are twisting my discoveries, pushing the boundaries into areas I explicitly warned against. The separate project they speak of, funded through a labyrinthine network of shell companies, is not about medical advancement. It's about control. Weaponization. My breath hitched. Omnicorp. The corporate giant that had funded Thorne's lab. I scrolled down, my eyes devouring each word. Entry 151, I have uncovered irrefutable evidence. Omnicorp is leveraging my core research, not for the stated purpose, but for a clandestine program to develop a highly targeted biological agent. They call it Project Chimera B. It's designed to incapacitate specific genetic markers, leaving others untouched. A selective plague. My ethical concerns have been dismissed, outright ignored. They believe they can control it. They are fools. A selective plague. The phrase echoed in my mind, cold and terrifying. This wasn't just about stolen research. This was about something far more sinister, something that could reshape global power dynamics in a horrific way. Entry 154, I cannot stand by.
My conscience demands action.
I intend to compile all the evidence, this journal included, and expose Omnicorp's true intentions. The world needs to know what they are building. I will make sure my findings reach the public, even if it means sacrificing everything. The last entry was dated 2 days before Thorne's death. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The engineered sabotage, the destruction of the lab, the meticulous cover-up, it wasn't just to steal his research. It was to silence him. To prevent him from exposing Omnicorp and their horrifying Project Chimera B, Thorne wasn't just a brilliant bioengineer, he was a whistleblower, and his murder was an execution designed to bury the truth forever. My gaze drifted to the glowing screen, the words searing themselves into my mind. But the killer wasn't just someone familiar with Thorne's lab. They were someone intimately connected to Omnicorp, someone willing to commit murder on a grand scale to protect a secret that could shatter the world. The game had just changed. And I had just stepped onto a much larger, and far more dangerous, battlefield. Monitors hummed a low, continuous drone, casting a bluish glow across the stacks of data reports and the empty mugs that littered my workstation. 2 days. 2 days since I'd found Thorne's final, damning entry, the one that screams silenced rather than accident. The thought of Omnicorp's complicity, their hoe. The words still unfinished in the digital margins of Thorne's notes, gnawed at me. It wasn't just about stolen research, it was about preventing him from exposing something far more insidious. My jaw ached from clenching. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the glowing text on the primary display. The raw access logs for Thorne's high-security lab were a labyrinth, but a finite one. Every swipe card, every biometric scan, every keypad entry, meticulously recorded. I filtered the data, narrowing the time frame to the week leading up to Thorne's death, paying particular attention to the 2 days prior when his final notes were made. Only a handful of individuals had the necessary clearance and physical presence. My fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up each profile. A senior research assistant, a facilities manager, an IT specialist, and the Omnicorp liaison. I dismissed the research assistant. Her expertise was in biochemical assays, not the sophisticated network intrusion and explosive device construction I'd identified. The facilities manager handled maintenance, but his digital footprint was clean, no specialized IT or security system knowledge beyond basic oversight. The IT specialist was a possibility, but his background was in database management, not the kind of embedded systems manipulation that had crippled Thorne's lab. That left the Omnicorp liaison, David Thorne. No relation to Aris, the records confirmed. He'd been the primary point of contact between Omnicorp and Aris Thorne's independent research facility for the past 18 months. My initial assessment of him had been purely professional, a suit, smooth and articulate, with an unervingly calm demeanor. Now, I needed to look deeper. I cross-referenced David Thorne's employment history, academic records, and any public-facing information. His resume was polished, almost too perfect. A degree in business, followed by a rapid ascent through Omnicorp's corporate structure, specializing in intellectual property acquisition and strategic partnerships. But as I dug into the older records, the ones buried deeper in the public archives and less prominent databases, a flicker of something unexpected caught my attention. A gap. A 5-year period between his undergraduate degree and his first recorded position at Omnicorp. It wasn't an unemployment gap, the dates simply didn't align with his declared trajectory. It was as if that chunk of his life had been meticulously pruned from his professional narrative.
My internal alarms began to blare.
People with gaps like that usually had something to hide, or something they were specifically trained to hide. I initiated a deeper search, expanding my parameters, focusing on any association with security firms, government contracts, or specialized training programs during that missing time frame. The search word, churning through millions of data points. The tension in the suite seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. I could feel the weight of what I was about to uncover, the sheer audacity of someone operating so close to Aris Thorne while harboring such a concealed past. Then, the results began to populate. Not a direct hit, but a series of tangential connections. A specialized private security contractor, highly discreet, often working on sensitive corporate asset protection and retrieval. Their client list was heavily redacted, but one name surfaced with surprising regularity in associated news articles, Omnicorp. And buried within the contractor's old, unverified employee logs, a training cohort from that very 5-year gap. The names were encrypted, but the skill sets listed were chillingly specific: advanced surveillance, counter-surveillance, digital forensics, and
covert asset recovery. Covert operations. The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. David Thorne wasn't just a corporate liaison, he was an operative. An inside man, placed strategically. His background wasn't in business development, it was in dismantling, acquiring, and silencing. A scandal from 7 years ago, involving a rival biotech firm. Intellectual property theft. Sabotage of research facilities. The details were eerily similar to Thorne's case. The firm had gone bankrupt, its groundbreaking research absorbed by a larger entity. Omnicorp. My breath hitched. David Thorne had not only the technical skills required to orchestrate the sophisticated sabotage, the knowledge of networks, security. He had the motive, the means, and the operational experience. The room, moments ago just a quiet workspace, now felt charged with an almost unbearable pressure. The quiet hum of the machines seemed to amplify the rapid beat of my own pulse. I had found my prime suspect. This wasn't just a corporate hit. This was a professional. A ghost. And he was still out there. 2 days. 2 days since I'd pieced together the fragments, tracing the iridescent polymer from the scorched remains of my own apartment back to Thorne's lab, confirming the deliberate nature of that accidents that had targeted me. Now, it was time to smoke out the architect. I'd spent the last hour meticulously arranging the bait. A secure terminal, logged into a restricted database, displayed a summary report. The title was a bland, bureaucratic Project Nightingale Data Synthesis, Phase 3 Overview. Harmless. But buried 3 lines down, a single, deceptively simple bullet point glowed, confirmed, novel cellular delivery vector achieves 98.7% compound integration efficiency. To anyone outside Thorne's inner circle, it meant nothing. To the killer, it was a siren call. It meant Aris Thorne hadn't just made a breakthrough, he'd perfected the delivery mechanism for his compound, making it far too potent, far too controllable, and far too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands, or, more accurately, to be exposed by its creator. I deliberately left the terminal unattended, a cup of lukewarm coffee beside it, and walked away, ostensibly to confer with a colleague down the hall. My actual destination was a small,
darkened observation room overlooking the main suite through a one-way mirror. The hum of the monitors was muted here, replaced by the faint whir of the surveillance system. I watched the suite, a patient predator. Time stretched, each minute a taut wire. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting long, stark shadows. My jaw ached from clenching. I had gambled on the killer's desperation, on the profound implications of that single data point. If Thorne was about to expose their true project, the delivery vector, breakthrough meant the window for neutralization was closing. The executive, Thorne's brother, entered the suite. He moved with an almost practiced nonchalance, a man accustomed to privileged access. He was carrying a slim briefcase, a prop for an illusion of legitimate business. He glanced around, his gaze lingering on my empty workstation, then on the glowing screen. A subtle shift in his posture, a tightening around his eyes, I saw it all. He walked directly to my terminal, his fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before he sat down. He wasn't just looking, he was actively searching, his face illuminated by the screen's blue light. He typed, his movements swift and purposeful, navigating deeper into the files. He wasn't trying to read, he was trying to erase. He was trying to bury the truth, just as he had tried to bury Aris Thorne, and just as he had tried to bury me. I pushed open the observation room door, the sudden creak echoing in the quiet suite. He froze, his hands still poised over the keyboard. His head snapped up, eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and dawning comprehension. I walked towards him, each step deliberate, the sound of my shoes on the polished floor unnaturally loud. He recovered quickly, a practiced smile twisting his lips. "Read. Just checking on the progress. You know, Omnicorp's commitment to cooperation. This data. It's sensitive. Making sure nothing compromising gets out." He gestured vaguely at the screen, a desperate attempt at normalcy. "Compromising, indeed," I agreed, stopping directly opposite him. Especially that little detail about the novel cellular delivery vector. A real game-changer for Aris Thorne's crop enhancement research, wouldn't you say? The sarcasm in my voice was a blunt instrument. Global food security, you understand. I understand a great deal, I countered, leaning forward, my gaze locking with his. I understand that Aris Thorne wasn't developing genetically modified supercrops. He was developing a bioweapon. And that delivery vector was the final piece of the puzzle, making it incredibly effective, incredibly difficult to detect, and incredibly valuable to the wrong people. He pushed back from the terminal, standing up, his posture stiffening. "That's a wild accusation, Reed. Baseless speculation." "Is it?" I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small, sealed evidence bag. Inside, a shard of the iridescent polymer, barely visible, glinted under the fluorescent light. "This is from the ventilation grate in Aris Thorne's lab. Identical to the trace I found in the scorched remains of my apartment. And I'm quite certain we'll find more of it on your clothes, on your briefcase, perhaps even on the tools you just tried to use to erase those files." I tossed the bag onto the desk between us. It landed with a soft thud. "This polymer, executive, is a unique byproduct of the high-energy plasma reactions Thorne was using in his actual research. The kind of reactions you'd need to create a bioweapon. The kind that leaves a signature." The blood drained from his face. His eyes darted to the evidence bag, then back to mine.
The pretense evaporated, leaving only raw fear and defeat. He realized what Omnicorp was planning to do with his research, the potential for misuse. He was going to leak everything. The bioweapon, the unethical trials. They said Aris was a liability, a loose cannon. I tried to talk him down, to reason with him. But he was determined. So, I had to neutralize him. Make it look like an accident. The lab explosion, it was my design. And when you started poking around, getting too close, finding the traces, I couldn't let you uncover it all. The hum of the monitors suddenly seemed deafening. The colleague's voice had trailed off, leaving the butt hanging in the air, a silent accusation against the corporate machinery he'd served. Before he could elaborate, the door to the interview room swung open. A lead investigator, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped in, flanked by two uniformed agents. Her presence shifted the atmosphere immediately, replacing the tense quiet with an undeniable sense of finality. Mr. Thorne, the lead investigator stated, her voice calm but firm, "You're under arrest for your involvement in the death of Dr. Aris Thorne, and for obstruction of justice. Anything you say can and will be used against you." David Thorne didn't resist. He simply nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible movement. The agents moved in, their movements efficient, practiced. As the cuffs clicked into place, a shudder ran through his frame, a stark contrast to the quiet resignation he'd displayed moments before. He was let out, his head bowed, leaving me alone in the sterile room, the lingering scent of stale coffee and impending consequence hanging heavy. I watched the door close behind them, the sound echoing the closure of one chapter, while simultaneously blasting open a dozen more. My initial grim satisfaction quickly gave way to a cold dread. This wasn't just a single murder, it was a symptom, a visible wound on a much larger, diseased organism. The faction within Omnicorp he'd mentioned, that was the real quarry now. The hallways outside buzzed with a newfound energy. Whispers of Omnicorp and arrest traveled quickly, carried on the hushed tones of agents and analysts. The suite was a cathedral of data, a sprawling space where banks of monitors glowed with spectral images, complex schematics, and scrolling lines of code. The air hummed with the quiet thrum of machinery and the focused concentration of the specialists bent over their workstations. I found the director, a man named Sterling, already there, his face etched with a mix of exhaustion and grim determination. He stood before a large projection screen displaying a meticulously constructed organizational chart, a spider web of names and titles, many of them highlighted in red. "Read." Sterling acknowledged, without turning, his voice low. "Your colleague sang, just as you predicted." He gave us a lead, Director. I corrected, walking closer to the screen. "The full symphony is still unwritten." Sterling finally turned, his eyes meeting mine. He confirmed it. A cabal, operating within Omnicorp's highest echelons. They saw Aris Thorne's research as too powerful, too volatile, to be left to a loose cannon, his words, not mine. They wanted control, absolute control, and Aris was resisting. He gestured to the screen. "We've been working through financial records, encrypted communications, even some disgruntled former employees. David Thorne's confession just gave us the final pieces of the puzzle." He pointed to several names highlighted in crimson. "These are the architects. Senior VPs, heads of R&D, even a board member.
They orchestrated the pressure, the threats, and ultimately, the accident that took Aris Thorne's life. David Thorne was just a pawn, albeit a willing one. My stomach tightened. The scale of it was breathtaking. This wasn't corporate espionage, it was corporate assassination, cloaked in the guise of scientific mishap. They wanted the research director. What was it, exactly, that Aris Thorne was so fiercely protecting? Sterling sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. That's the million-dollar question, Reed. Or, more accurately, the multi-trillion-dollar question. We're still sifting through the remains of his lab, but from what we've pieced together, Aris Thorne was on the verge of a breakthrough in bioregenerative technology. Something that could revolutionize medicine, agriculture, even extend human lifespan. The potential for good is immense, but so is the potential for weaponization, for catastrophic misuse. As he spoke, one of the smaller monitors in the suite flickered, displaying a live news feed. A reporter, breathless and urgent, stood outside the Omnicorp headquarters, a throng of cameras and microphones surrounding her. The headline banner scrolled beneath her: Omnicorp executives arrested in bioengineer murder plot, corporate scandal rocks global markets. The news had broken. The dam had burst. I felt a strange mix of vindication and apprehension. My meticulous work, the microscopic traces, the unusual burn patterns, they had all led here, to this public unraveling. The public would be shocked, outraged. The ethical debate surrounding scientific advancement and corporate responsibility would ignite, raging across every media platform. The phone lines are already melting, Sterling observed, his gaze fixed on the news report. Governments, international organizations, everyone wants a piece of this. Everyone wants control of Thorne's research. The future of his work, the very legacy of Aris Thorne, is now a global commodity. I looked from the screen, where the world reacted in real time, to the images of Aris Thorne's destroyed lab still projected on a nearby wall, a stark reminder of the human cost of ambition and unchecked power. My investigation had brought a killer to justice, exposed a conspiracy. But the true aftermath, the wider implications of Aris Thorne's genius and his tragic end, had only just begun. The tension in the suite was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that while one battle was won, the war for control of a world-changing discovery was far from over. My fingers traced the cool, smooth surface of the evidence locker, the one where Thorne's final, corrupted data chip now rested, sealed and catalogued. The digital clock on the far wall glowed a sterile green, 2:47. Hours passed when most of my colleagues had retreated to the quiet of their homes. For me, the quiet here was its own kind of solace, a space to unpack the layers of what we had uncovered. The screen still displayed the global headlines, a cacophony of fear and relief. The world had reacted with a seismic jolt to the revelation of Thorne's killer and the true nature of his final project, a power source capable of revolutionizing energy, nearly weaponized by ambition. I remembered the initial chaos, the frantic calls, the sheer disbelief that something so potent could be born and almost stolen in the shadow of academic pretense. The images of Aris Thorne's destroyed lab, still occasionally cycling on the adjacent monitor, were a stark reminder of the human cost of ambition and unchecked power. But the true aftermath, the lingering ethical fallout, was just beginning. I leaned back in the ergonomic chair, the synthetic fabric cool against my spine. A single, almost invisible filament of altered polymer, a unique burn pattern on a shattered circuit board, these were the whispers that had guided me through the roar of speculation.
They were the silent screams of a brilliant mind betrayed, the forensic breadcrumbs left by a killer who believed themselves infallible. The silence of the suite, punctuated only by the distant whir of ventilation, allowed my thoughts to drift beyond the procedural. It wasn't just about the who or the how anymore, it was about the why, and what that why meant for all of us. Thorne's research, intended for global good, had been a double-edged sword, a testament to humanity's relentless push against the boundaries of knowledge. The killer, driven by a twisted vision of control, had seen not potential, but leverage. They had viewed Thorne's genius as a tool, his life as an obstacle. The weight of that thought settled on my shoulders, a familiar burden. The details, no matter how small, embedded themselves in my mind, replaying in quiet moments. The faint, metallic tang that had clung to Thorne's lab coat, incongruous with the usual sterile scents. The almost imperceptible tremor in the voice of the corporate executive during our first interview. Each fragment, a piece of a larger, unsettling mosaic. But then, there was the counterweight. The satisfaction, deep and resonant, of giving voice to the silent. Of piecing together the broken narrative and presenting it, undeniable, before those who sought to obscure it. This was my commitment, my unwavering resolve. Forensic justice wasn't just about putting names to faces, it was about upholding a fragile balance, ensuring that the truth, however inconvenient or dangerous, found its light. I pushed away from the desk, the chair gliding silently across the polished floor. My eyes scanned the room, from the chromatograph to the mass spectrometer, each machine a silent partner in the pursuit of facts. Thorne's case was closed. The official reports were filed, the legal proceedings underway. His legacy, once teetering on the precipice of infamy, was now being carefully re-evaluated, his groundbreaking work secured from those who would exploit it. There was a sense of profound closure for this particular tragedy. Yet, a subtle tension remained, a persistent hum beneath the surface of my satisfaction. The world had seen what was possible, both the brilliance and the malevolence. The genie of advanced scientific discovery was out of the bottle, and it wasn't going back in. There would always be another Thorne, another groundbreaking project, another individual or group eager to twist innovation for their own ends. The struggle between progress and peril was an endless one, a constant dance on the edge of a precipice. My work, I knew, was far from over. As if on cue, the secure message alert on my private terminal blinked, a single, insistent red light. A new case file, encrypted, marked high priority. My fingers paused over the keyboard, a flicker of anticipation mixed with the familiar weariness. Another anomaly, another whisper in the data, waiting to be amplified. The night was still young, and somewhere, a new truth was waiting to be uncovered.